This looks a bit leafy and slippery and potholy and horrible. Good afternoon, YouTube. Oh, my third vlog of today. Been out for a good few hours now. I started with good morning YouTubes. Hopefully Mrs. Calm has pretty much got the Christmas decorations put away by now, because I'm getting cold. Just had to stop off for a nice cup of coffee and try and get my gloves a bit warmer. So I mentioned in an earlier vlog from today, do 3, and that one of them was to do with sugar. Now, a couple of years ago, as if you've watched my videos you'll know, I found out I had diabetes, type 2 diabetes, which is the one you get when you're obese, which is awkward really, because I'm not. I actually get told sometimes that I look too thin, that I'm underweight. Now, since I got diabetes, the type of person that I am, I tend to analyse everything. That's why I became a software developer and an analyst. Kind of fits with how I think. So I've spent a lot of time researching diabetes, researching diet, trying to understand what causes diabetes. And not just reading kind of the nutcases on the internet, but of which of course I may be one, but looking at the proper research that's been ideally not funded by people who might have a vested interest, and trying to understand from the diabetes side how to minimise its impact, because the impact of diabetes is pretty horrible. It's not just early death, it's early death after many years of potentially losing limbs, blindness, kidney dialysis, liver failure, circulation problems, heart attack, stroke, the list goes on. And I don't want that, surprisingly enough. I can't think that there are going to be many people who would want that. But also it's got me investigating foods and things like that as well. So far it's working for me. 2 years in, I've got a HbA1c of 4.9%, which is normal. If I went to the doctors now and asked them to test me to see if I'm diabetic or not, they would say I'm not, which is good. I am, let's be clear, I am diabetic still, but because of what I eat, I'm hiding that and hopefully stopping the side effects. Anyway, this is not the point of this video. The point of this video is to talk about one particular foodstuff, and that foodstuff is sugar. Now, I think sugar is the work of the devil. The more research I do about sugar, the scarier it becomes. The problem is it's cheap and it's in everything, and they keep finding cheaper versions of it. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what I found out about sugar. Now, I can go on for hours about this, so I'm going to try and keep this pretty short. Some of it will be a bit sciencey, but I'm going to try and avoid the sciencey stuff, because you can find that out there. There are a lot of people who can explain it better than me. If you want to know a lot about it, there's a great book by a guy, Dr. John Yudkin, called Pure, White and Deadly, and if we'd listened to him in the 80s rather than listening to the clown who was doing his pseudoscience about high fat diets, we would all be a lot healthier now. Just a point on the high fat diets: people are scared silly of fat, and they shouldn't be. I eat probably 90% fat now, and the reason that we're scared of fat is because governments have told us we should be. And governments have told us we should be based on some really dubious science. And let's be clear, this started in the late 70s, early 80s. It kept turning as, oh, people are getting fatter, people are getting heavier, more obese, they're getting more heart attacks, strokes, cardiovascular disease, and this pseudo-scientific junk said it was down to high-fat diets. Now, if that was true, they tell us now we're eating about 10 to 20% of the fat that we used to be eating then. We have now got more obesity, we've got more heart disease, more cardiovascular disease, more heart attacks, more strokes, and as they keep telling us, a diabetes epidemic. The definition of insanity, some people say, is doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting different results. It's time for the governments of the world to wake up and say, actually the low-fat thing isn't working, is it? There are some Scandinavian countries where they're going back to high-fat diets now, moving away from the margarines and going on to the butters, and they're finding the diabetes is coming down. Anyway, that's again off topic. I do this all the time. So sugar. So sugar is such a simple thing, and there's a lot of different types of sugar. The main one that I'm thinking of is your table sugar, which is half glucose, half sucrose. Sorry, it is sucrose. It's half glucose, half fructose. Now we can also bandy into this fructose, because everyone tells you fructose, oh, it's fruit stuff, isn't it? It's from fruit, it's natural. Now you go out and find me a granulated fruit, and then I'll agree with you. But all this stuff that we're getting is processed to the point that it's barely a food anymore. I would argue it's actually a poison. And there's a chap who argues that very well, but I forget his name. Might be Robert Lustig, I think it is. The problem with fruit sugar is, in fruit, not so bad. You know, you eat an apple, it's got 8 grams of sugar in it, 8 grams of fructose. Fructose tends to come in a pair in the same way that sucrose is a pair of molecules, one glucose, one fructose. Fructose is 2 fructose. The body turns fructose into usable sugar pretty quickly, so it's not really a big deal. But fructose can be the problem one. Fructose is the sweet one. Glucose actually isn't particularly sweet. Fructose is the sweet one, the one that your body craves, but the one that your body shouldn't be able to get in the way that is now freely available because of processing. And here's the thing. When your body's got glucose, which is in your blood all the time, and usually it's regulated, come back to that in a minute, regulated by the body automatically, and you need a bit of glucose, your brain runs on it. Some doctors still say to you that your body needs glucose everywhere else as well, but that's not true. You can run your muscles and what have you off glucose, but you can also run them off fat quite happily, and a process called gluconeogenesis, where your body can turn fat and protein into the glucose that it actually requires for the brain. Anyway, sorry, I'm going sciencey. But yeah, so glucose your body does use. Fructose in your blood, not such a good thing. So what your body does is it tries to get rid of it. Now before I go into how it does it, and I'm going to do it really quick, I just want to think about alcohol. If you've got alcohol in your body, everybody knows alcohol does you damage, right? But it's nice, so we all tolerate it a bit, and some people go a bit too mad. And the people who go a bit too mad give us some great science. Because what you find is that people who have a lot of alcohol, what happens is the alcohol gets in your blood, your body wants rid of it, your brain actually takes up some of it, which is why you get drunk. That might be 10 or 20% goes to your brain, and the rest has to be processed by your liver. Things that are only processed by your liver are generally poisonous. That's your liver's job, is to clean up the mess. So what happens is the liver gets hold of it and it gets converted very, very quickly into fat, and that's why people who drink a lot of alcohol end up with fatty liver syndrome. Now what they're finding nowadays is a lot of people are getting fatty liver syndrome who don't drink, or drink in moderation, whatever that means. So what's going on there? Well, it turns out a lot of that can be put down to sugar, particularly fructose. Fructose follows the same pathways pretty much as alcohol, in that it's processed out of your blood by your liver, and unfortunately, like alcohol, it can turn to fat inside your liver, and fat inside your liver is a nightmare. So you get fatty liver syndrome, and in a way it's worse than alcohol, because your brain can't even process fructose. It is essentially worthless. You don't even have an insulin response to it. Your body just wants it out. Just wants it out of you as quickly as possible. Maybe we evolved to like the sweetness of fructose because it was attached to fruit, and fruit is full of lots of other good stuff. You know, if you eat an orange, you get some vitamins and you get lots of fibre, and you need all that kind of stuff. You don't need the sugar in it though. That's pure energy, and for the lives we lead now, we have far too much energy. So fructose by itself can cause that kind of problem, and sugar, as I say, is half fructose and causes that kind of problem. Now there's a secondary effect as well. As you start to get these build-ups of fat around your organs and in your organs, that can lead to insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is the bit where your muscles refuse to take up glucose out of your blood, because insulin is released into your body if you are functioning normally, if you're not diabetic. Insulin is released into your body in response to high sugar levels, specifically high glucose levels. So when you eat sugar, it's that half of the sugar, that glucose half. The insulin tries to get rid of that sugar, and it triggers the muscles to pull out sugar and store it as glycogen, so that your muscles are ready to go off later on and do some running. Some of it gets stored in your liver to be released later when you need it for a burst of energy. Some of it gets stored in fat. Now when you've got insulin resistance, it tends to go to the fat end. There's actually some people saying that it's not that you're obese that causes diabetes, it's that you've become insulin resistant, so your body has no choice. Where is it going to get rid of its sugar? It can only go into fat. So you start getting more fat, and that makes the insulin resistance worse, and you get into a vicious circle, and you become diabetic and obese, and there's not a lot you can do about it. And it actually gets worse than that, because I think, again, Lustig is very good at explaining this when he does work with kids with brain tumours, and he's shown, I won't go into the details, get his book, Fat Chance. Fat Chance is the name of the book, not my assumption about what chance there is of you buying it. But he's done a lot of investigation and research, and he's seen how if you have insulin resistance, you actually start to get what's called leptin resistance. And leptin is another hormone in the body, and leptin is responsible for telling your brain that you're full. So after you've eaten, you have a nice meal, the leptin comes along, tells your body you're full. If you haven't eaten in a long time, the lack of leptin means that your brain isn't getting triggered in that particular area, so your brain says, oh well, you're starving then, must be starving. So any chance you've got to eat, crave food, do anything you can to get food, and don't exercise. Whatever you do, don't exercise. Sit on the settee, sit on the couch, if you call it a couch, settee to me, but don't exercise, because you're just burning fuel and the body doesn't have enough. Now if you've got leptin resistance, that doesn't work. So you can eat a meal, you can be stuffed to the point of bursting, and your body still thinks you're starving, and it will not allow you to exercise, and it will not allow you to think about anything other than getting food. And he's shown from kids who've unfortunately had tumours and had that part of the brain damaged, and they've had to put interventions in with medicines to get around this problem, that they can reduce these children to a 500 calorie a day diet, technically on the borderline of starving to death, and they still become obese. It's not just as simple as food goes in, you get fat, exercise, you get thin. Now these kids obviously have had serious brain trauma, You know, they've had operations that have damaged the brain, or the tumours have damaged the brain. But he's shown that the same holds with sugar. As you build your insulin resistance, if you are genetically that way, and in the past it was actually potentially a good thing to be genetically that way, because it meant you could store fat easier, keep you through the winters when food was scarce and we were all cavemen and what have you. Now, but yeah, if you get that insulin resistance and that builds into leptin resistance, you can become obese. Hopefully you're starting to see why I think sugar is the devil. There's a few other things. You know, sugar, they know now, is linked with diabetes. You'll find that sugar companies are sponsoring diabetes organisations. Now, that seems like a conflict of interest to me, and it seems that when they start sponsoring the diabetes organisations, that's about the same time that the diabetes organisations tell you that it's okay to have sweets if you're diabetic. Interesting, that. But, so we know it's linked to type 2 diabetes. They're starting to call, or some scientists, some doctors are starting to call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes, because a certain form of Alzheimer's appears to be caused by insulin resistance in the brain, so the brain is unable to take up the glucose it needs, and parts of the brain die accordingly. If that isn't enough to scare you off sugar, consider that some cancers feed off glucose in the blood, and there are some studies in a German university hospital that have shown that people who were on the verge of dying of brain cancers, where all other interventions and surgeries have failed, have actually lived for much longer than expected by moving them onto a diet that was low in carbohydrates, so kept the blood sugars low. And obviously the worst carbohydrate for keeping your blood sugars low is sugar itself. And what they've found is that those tumours stop growing, and in some cases start to shrink when you remove sugar from the diet. It has to be said that there are countries in the world that are completely unaware of the idea of cancers. Cancers are just unheard of, as are cardiovascular diseases, heart disease, strokes and diabetes. Countries where people still die of old age rather than the so-called lifestyle diseases, and where, uncannily, they don't have processed sugars, processed corn, wheat, all that kind of stuff. They don't have the white flours and all that kind of thing. The Inuit peoples, some people would call Eskimos in the past, were a case in point. People who live off, or used to live off, hugely fat-based diets, eating whale blubber of all things, essentially pure fat, didn't know what diabetes was. Now they're one of the areas of the world that has the biggest increase in diabetes, and that just happens to be about 10 years after introducing them to processed flours and sugar. Funny that, isn't it? Anyway, I could go on for hours. I've probably gone on for much longer than the 7 minutes that I always try and aim for, or 5 to 9 minutes, maybe give myself 2 minutes leeway. So hopefully food for thought. Personally, I'd go for fatty food rather than sugary food. Anyway, thanks for watching, YouTubers. Ride safe, eat fat, and I'll talk to you all again soon.